Hello, and welcome back. We're back with another live stream. Today, I'm here again with Del, and last time we were talking about a JD. Today, we wanted to do something a little bit different and try to do a resume review. One thing that's interesting about this is that we decided to use ChatGPT to generate most of the text for this resume. The first one we're going to be reviewing, and so we'll start with kind of the ChatGPT generated resume, go into some of the things that it can improve on, and then move into the tips and mistakes to avoid moving forward, and then look at maybe a good resume and what that looks like. So Del, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Nice.
Hana keen.
Nice. It's very nice and gray here in Tokyo, and super cold. So, in honor of Final Fantasy VII's anniversary that just passed, I decided to name our candidate Cloud Strife. So let's go ahead and take a look at this resume.
Also Brian's favorite Smash Bros. Character.
I'm actually a Mega Man player, but I do appreciate that Cloud is there. Okay, so yeah, let's start with just looking at this kind of first section, or maybe let's start a little bit more general. So like, for you, Del, as a professional tech recruiter in Tokyo, what are your thoughts kind of around resumes? You've said, when I asked you before, you mentioned you've seen upwards of 10,000 resumes potentially in your career. And so like, how do you feel about resumes? What are your thoughts when you're kind of initially looking at a resume? What are things that maybe stand out to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, a resume is just basically a tool to get your foot into the door, speaking with a company. Resume is generally the first step of how you would get to introduce yourself. So you want it to be personalized. It's not going to have just generic things. You want it to have things that are, unique to you, things that show much about your experience, where you come from, and kind of what you're looking for in the future.
Nice. One of the things I remember you had mentioned to me when we were talking about doing this was the fact that, you said this also when we were talking about the JD, was that if you have the time, you would recommend really custom tailoring your resume even to fit the job that you're targeting. Mm-hmm. And be sure to kind of highlight those skills that are relevant. And saying that, what are maybe some of the stages of reviews that a resume goes through, and why is it important to highlight those things?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so in smaller like startup companies, you might just have the direct CEO or kind of CTO, someone who's in a senior management position, reviewing that resume directly. But if it's a larger company, multinational corporation, or just very general kind of corporate environment, there's going to be a lot of different hands that it passes through. And especially if it's someone that I'm referring this resume to the company through like a portal, usually it's going to go to like a talent acquisition staff member. After they, screen out the resume, they might go through the hiring manager, and then it could go to various people within the organization on the team after that. But for the most part, I'd say it kind of passes through a couple different hands before it actually gets to the person who's going to be making the decision about that role.
Yeah, that's great. And so there's, like you mentioned, there's a few levels that the resume has to go through. What are maybe some of the things that like you're thinking about when you're looking at the resume versus maybe what the TA is thinking about, like versus the hiring manager? And I guess like for you, what's that initial kind of screening, and are you pretty like more open and that funnel kind of whittles down, or would you say everybody's basically on the same page in those three stages?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is depending upon the specific job that we're looking into. But a lot of times it does have to depend on the tech stack that the person is working with. A lot of jobs that I'm working on, at least on like kind of the back end or server-side engineering, you'll see people that, or companies that would like to have several years in a certain tech stack or working with a certain language. And so if it doesn't have, the minimum required years, 3 years or 5 years in some cases for that position or for that role, they really want someone who has that sort of experience in their past with that type of language. So if they don't have that particular language Maybe they've only had 1 or 2 years of it, or I've actually only used it in an academic setting, in university, like studying it. That's probably going to be one of the things I'll look for first, is kind of what different technologies they've used. Another thing is just kind of about industry experience. So maybe you've been using this similar technology as far as like the tech stack, but then it wasn't for web-based technologies. It was more for embedded technologies. Maybe you've been working in an industry that uses that technology in a very different way than it might be used if it's like in an online capacity. So relevance to the actual tech stack, relevance to the industry itself, just anything that's similar to the actual position and kind of what that position is going to be doing. Those are some of the things that I'll be looking for in that.
Great. Yeah, and so I think that actually leads well into kind of this first section. So on Cloud's resume, he decided to put the technical skills first, and basically list them out as far as just literally a list of skills and so forth. Yeah, do you want to take a look?
Yeah. What is the hiring manager looking for here? Let's see. Well, so list out.
Let's say, maybe that's a good
technologies.
point. He's maybe applying for a specifically like a data engineering position,
okay.
something around maybe like big data.
Sure. So the technical skills that he's listed up top, it's just kind of a very wide, think of it like a shotgun approach. Maybe these are just different technologies that Cloud has touched upon, has used in the past. It doesn't really give any indication about the level that he's used them. Although at the bottom, though, it says language, Japanese native, English native. So that does show kind of which level that they're working at with those. I think it would be helpful to sort of rank these different technologies. They do have them split up by applications, by mobile operating systems, data, programming languages, but rather if there could be like a further distinguishing variant that shows how good they are at each one of those, like if it's whether beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, or just show the amount of years that they've had using those. That's very good to sort of gauge what your proficiency is with a certain technology.
For sure. Okay. And so instead of maybe just a list, I guess it is appreciated that he at least mentioned these technologies,
definitely.
But like you said, it doesn't really give a clear indication of like how much experience he's had with Hive or Kafka or whatever these tools might be, other than his language ability.
Yeah.
And so if you were to kind of give him some advice, you would say just maybe would you kind of use that same format? I mean, I guess this is a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, you could say after each programming language that you've used, or different kinds of applications, say just like a parentheses and how many years you've used it, or like a ranking level. If you have established 5 stars, meaning advanced, 1 star, meaning beginner, something kind of in that range generally gives people an idea of how good or proficient you are at something.
Great. And so I remember when we talked about this before, you mentioned this term specifically, tech soup, which is kind of like just a hodgepodge of skills. Like would you say this is tech soup, or would you say he's maybe like one level above tech soup?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say with TechSoup, it's just generally if you list out all the technologies and skills that you have in your arsenal, without giving it an indication of like which skills are better, like whether or not you've actually, because people tend to put just every single programming language that they've ever known about or heard about or actually used. If you just used it for 3 months on a project about 10 years ago, it's like, are you actually going to be still able to use it now? It's like, it needs to be kind of just a gauge of how good you actually are at using that technology.
That's great. And so that's something that helps you when you're initially looking at it. Is that still pretty relevant for like the TA who's going to be looking at it after the talent acquisition person, or is it going to be even more relevant for the hiring manager? Is like what are the thoughts that are going into that? Like, is that mainly for the recruiter you're working with, or potentially the internal members as well?
Yeah. So say, for example, the first person within the organization, that it's being reviewed by, if it's talent acquisition staff or like a HR sort of person. Usually what they're going to be looking for is different things that they can check off. Like check the box if it has this, check the box if it has that. If it doesn't have 3 years of Java experience, they're going to pass on that resume. So it's very important to have, any idea of, if you can basically, in the job description, if there's listed something, a certain skill set that they require and how many years that they need it for, if you can actually just sort of put your professional experience with that programming language or that skill or that technology right to the front in like a header or a summary, that would certainly be a lot quicker at sort of getting your resume across.
Let's see if we can actually go to maybe the resume or the job description that we used last time. No. Yeah, I mean, next time maybe we'll do that. I'll have the JD ready that we can compare it to. Yeah, okay, so that's good. So, but if there was a language that you knew that they were looking for, like that would be maybe the most important thing. And so, as far as formatting goes, would you recommend keeping the technical skills pretty close to the top? I've seen other people potentially put those like down here, like after all of their professional experience. Is there a specific place that you feel that's the most beneficial?
It's good to have them near the top. They don't necessarily need to be the first thing that people see. I've seen where with like say a summary, they're listing out just kind of a brief kind of introduction about themselves, their experience, the industries that they've worked with, and then sort of moving into like technical abilities and things like that. And so I think it's good to have it at least on the first page, I'd say.
Awesome. And so this part was actually this job summary section, which we're moving into next. This was actually generated through ChatGPT. And so looking over this, how necessary do you feel this type of introduction is? And is there anything that you notice that you would potentially change or update to help Cloud get into his next database position?
So I think it's definitely nice to have a bit of a summary about your experience that can show that your writing style or how you are basically speaking about yourself and your experience. But I think it's not always necessary to have like super much in like a paragraph format. Rather, if you can just have like more bullet points with very concise, specific details about your experience, that's usually a lot easier to sort of scan through and to sort of read it rather than having to dig in through paragraph to take out some information. That's
fair. Yeah, he mentions things that he works on pretty generally in here. But in like kind of relevant, he mentions the predictive models aim to optimize energy. So what the goals of the project were, the models that he was making. He says that he was collaborating. I know he also says communicate these complex data-driven concepts to maybe non-technical people. He mentions the stakeholders. And so do you feel like this is pretty relevant? He doesn't say, so compared to maybe the technical skills section, he doesn't really say like specific projects or what maybe the products he was working on, or the direct results, like as far as like numbers, things that are quantifiable. Do you feel like those are pretty necessary, or maybe you just cut this down, or what how would you maybe format this to be more relevant?
Yeah, I think as a general approach, it kind of just gives like an overall kind of what he's been doing in that. But again, if you're tailoring it more for a specific job or for a specific company, this could be a good opportunity for you to sort of have the job description listed on the one side, have your CV listed on another side, and then sort of being able to tailor this section about the most relevant things to that job or to that company, specific to industry, specific to their tech stack, specific to what their purpose of their product or their service is going to do.
Yeah, so like as an example, if Shinra had a specific payment platform and he was applying for Paydi or another like PayPay type fintech, maybe saying like that he was working on that specific product, what the number of users, the scalability, things that he was improving through data science, and having those kind of listed in bullet points is what.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I think the format is a little bit too paragraph versus bullet points, and so that's kind of the number one takeaway there. But then also maybe really looking at the JD and deciding, okay, these are the things that are important to them. How can I bring these out? Moving into the professional experience, these were also generated by ChatGPT, and they elaborate a bit more, I feel, on the job summary section. Actually, going back to the job summary section. In my mind, this kind of is a chance to tell a bit of your story, make you a little bit maybe more human as a candidate. But I do feel like these 3 paragraphs didn't really succeed in doing that. But then also, as you mentioned, like it doesn't give the specific bullet points that maybe the job is looking for. Would you recommend having some kind of introduction to yourself? Is that really relevant, or going into the kind of the mindset of the TA and the hiring manager again? Do they want that kind of blurb about yourself, or are they really more looking for, like you mentioned, those boxes that they can check, and then meeting you is where you can make that introduction?
Yeah, it's probably depending upon the specific company or the specific hiring manager that you're looking at, and also for the role exactly. I think generally speaking, if it's a technical role, they're going to want to see that you're able to do the job, and then so maybe that personalized aspect is not necessarily as important at the beginning. Although I would like to think that a personalized touch would set you apart from other applicants in the field. So say if you are applying for this position that 1,000 other people have applied to, this hiring manager or talent acquisition staff is not going to be spending 20 minutes looking over your resume, but rather probably between 30 seconds to a minute, just kind of overviewing, scanning through the document to see kind of what is available there. So I think if there's something that is unique, something that jumps out at them, it can certainly stick in their mind, I'd say. But
some kind of hook.
It's really dependent upon, I'd say, the company.
Okay, that's fair. And so moving into the professional experience section, so he has a few sections here, so what's your kind of take immediately? What are the things maybe that jump out at you, and then we can go into more details, like looking over that afterwards.
Yeah, so I think it's good to list the title and then which company, but it looks like he had changed positions, but it almost looked like how he put it there. It looks like it's like he's at a different company, or he's in the same company, but he's changed positions. So it gives a good explanation of kind of what he's doing in that position, but rather I think it doesn't need to be segregated by each position, but rather more if you've had different, a subtext rather than having.
Yeah, you're right. I think if you're just glancing at this, it can definitely look like they switch companies 3 times, right? But in reality, or in this reality of the fictional resume we're looking at, he was at the same company for a good portion of that, and he worked for 2 companies total.
And so I think just generally, as far as having the title and then the company and then sort of the years, the time that you've been there, maybe the location of the company if it's not a known organization or if it's a different country, but then to have several different bullet points highlighting kind of what it is that you were doing within that company, what was the goal of that project that you're working on. Generally, like he mentioned, using Apache, Spark, and Python, so different technical components that you're using in that role. It's good to include. Also, just kind of what was the result, what was the outcome of the project, if it was successful, if it's still ongoing. Just some more things about the future of that. It's very helpful.
Nice. Yeah. So the things that stood out to me. And I want to get your opinion on this because I actually don't know if this is correct or not. The first thing you mentioned is the company. So probably putting the company separate and kind of grouping the positions maybe broken down as they have it on LinkedIn, like where you can kind of have like the company and then like the separate positions. The one thing that jumped out at me right now as you were talking was you said that if it's not a known company, he doesn't really say what the company is doing. And so like you mentioned talking about the products or the projects that they're working on, I think that is really important because especially if it's not a known company, like the reader will have no real idea of what the purpose of the project was or like what the company was doing. Like if it's a small startup, especially like maybe if it is a huge company like Shinra, everyone knows what they're doing. But I do think having for when I was reviewing resumes, I would always say like, oh, keep like a little blurb about what the company does. Is that important on the technical side, or do you say it's more important just to look at like again the specific technology, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, brand recognition can play a part. I'd say maybe more in sales and marketing types of roles. But if the company's not known as far as kind of what they're doing, it would be good to explain a little bit more about kind of what you are doing within that company. If the company is, a banking company, but then you're working on certain aspects of the server development side, it could be relevant. So.
Nice. Okay, cool. And so like you mentioned, he is talking about the projects he's working on, but what he doesn't necessarily have are like specific results as far as like quantifiable users, if there's a revenue component that was generated, nothing is really, or the amount. He talks about the cost that he's saving, but he doesn't have the cost in numbers, just that it was cost saving.
Yeah. Anytime that there's like just a quantifiable amount, whether that's on results or just on users or usage of a platform, I think it's good to include to get people the idea of like what scale of that technology you're working with. So if it says, energy consumption data, like large amounts, analyzing large amounts, so what amount of that, or can you quantify that, would be good to do.
Like number of households or number of users or whatever. Like in this case, he's working with electricity, so I'm assuming. So that would be like the number of households that he's monitoring.
Give it a tangible sort of number, so that way you can sort of be like, oh, this is clear, kind of the effect that you're having.
Yeah.
So that's at the end of the day, it's like, what is the kind of the reason why you're doing this is to have a certain effect on the world.
Great. Yeah, and so then moving on within this. Yeah, this is another section of working. Again, those things apply to each position. Also, what would you say about the number of bullet points? Like, is that something that you consider? Like, does it matter how long or how much detail you go into? Is there like a limit? Would you say, like, I have no idea, but would you say like 3 bullet points per, or does it really matter? Like, you just give it as much as you can?
I think anything more than 3 is probably a little much, unless you've had experience working in a certain position. Like, say for example, he's working as a technical architect, goes into a database engineer, and then now he's like a data science engineer. So if you are wanting to emphasize a certain position that you had, it might be good to include more details about that, or as much details as possible. But I think really generally just a couple bullet points is probably fine to give them a summary of what you're doing in that role.
So like really summarize, and the bullet points have to be basically what the project was, what you did, and then the results that were gotten, basically, rather than maybe breaking it out into so many bullet points where it kind of gets lost in this shuffle. Because it is quite wordy, actually. From ChatGPT, it loves words. And then going further down. As far as like certificates and education, how relevant is this? Like, do people need to always be putting these in here?
Yes, certificates, they're certainly nice. It shows that you have gone the effort and went to either their class or done some sort of program to do that. I think it's useful to include in the, maybe the tail section. When it comes to the actual usage of that certificate, I think that's more important. So say if you have like a AWS Solutions Architect certificate, like that's great that you've received that or you went through the coursework to do that, but it's like, have you actually used that in practice? I think that's what's more important, is being able to show that you've have the ability of using that knowledge and have the ability of using that skill in a professional setting rather than just having kind of more of a certificate for it.
Okay, for sure. So it's not bad to include them, but if you can really connect it to the work that you're doing, that's kind of the most important part.
Yeah.
Education didn't necessarily list too much here.
Soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, certain universities can hold like a certain image, and it can always be for good or for worse. You know, if it's like a high-ranking university, it shows that you've been a diligent student and you went through all the years to go there and get that sort of degree. Or maybe they produce good class of technical abilities. I think it's more just kind of a formality. Like it should be something that you do include on there, because certain companies might need to have like a bachelor's degree at minimum to provide like a visa. So definitely do include sort of any educational details. If you could put a personalized note as well, if you were in any like clubs or societies. I've seen on resumes people put like hobbies. Say you're part of a chess club, or you like to play tennis, or your video games, just some certain like personal aspect, aside from just, what do you look like on paper, it's like, what do you actually look like in the flesh?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And something that I think I've heard mixed opinions for hobbies, but I know from my experience that I've had specific people who were hired, not solely because they had the experience that matched, but it definitely set them apart. Like I had someone I was working with who was the captain of their tennis team, and I know that reflected really well on kind of his ability to lead, and it definitely led to them being more interested than they would have been otherwise. Okay, so now I just want to kind of highlight these things that we had talked about. And these are just like quick kind of mistakes to avoid that we were mentioning before, and some of the stuff that we didn't get to. This is actually from a previous conversation, but I think we covered most of this. So yeah, just the first thing to keep in mind is group it maybe by company, and then underneath you can talk about your experience on those specific projects, and then the technologies you were using, the results, what you were specifically working on for those projects. Avoid the tech soup, which is just kind of that list of skills that we saw at the beginning of that resume here. You can see, like, rather than just having this list, maybe have it broken down a little bit more and have it specific to or specifically listing your experience level with each one, and whether or not you're like the native here is good, but then maybe having like expert or beginner, advanced, whatever that would be, that rating system. Then also, there's no LinkedIn and no GitHub, so including those contact details, which we actually didn't really get to cover. But yeah, maybe we can talk about that now. Like, important to include LinkedIn, GitHub. What are kind of the reasonings behind that?
Yeah, so as much as you can include on a resume, especially if you're an engineer, it's always good to show examples of source code. So a lot of times managers, they might like to see how legible or how clean is your code when you're actually putting it into practice. So having an example of your GitHub profile would be, one area for them to check on that. Nice.
Okay. And then another mistake to avoid is not including measurable results, which we saw from the ChatGPT generated resume. And then also not highlighting the experience relevant to the position you want to be working in.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you mentioned, kind of having the JD, looking at your resume and being able to really pull specifically what the company is looking for and the things that you've done that could connect to that.
Yeah.
Great. And so we actually have one more resume that we can look at. So this is a blind resume from someone that we've worked with in the past. And this is an example of maybe a resume that you liked. You want to talk about kind of what stood out to you initially as being kind of maybe better, or why this person had success?
Yeah, well, just the format for that, they're basically different locations, how they moved. That's why even still with company A, they have different scenarios. But they're listing a couple bullet points about what they're doing in that role, and then also listing, what technologies that they're using and kind of the dates and durations of that time. So you get a understanding of how long they've been using that technology and what was the purpose of it.
What are things maybe you would add even to this one?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would add?
Well, could probably group, say, company A is the first three. I guess, you might have been working on different functions within that if you're in different offices, but I think it's probably better to just have it sort of grouped as one company and then maybe have like different bullet points or subsections of that.
Nice. So they also specifically didn't say any results as far as like users, number of users that I can see. Is that something you would add?
Yeah, if you have that that data about what is the scale of the usage that you've been using, or any type of like results, it would certainly be good to include that.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So this is the full thing. It's actually pretty short, which is good, maybe good. Like you were kind of saying, like keep everything bullet points. You, like, especially. So, I guess this is more like a kind of a conceptual question. Is the resume a moment to really show your personality, or is the resume really more, like you said, for getting in the door, like hitting those boxes that the TA and the hiring manager is going to be looking for, and getting the interview where you can maybe show more of your personality?
Yeah, I think it's more getting the foot in the door. If you do have an interview set up, that's when you can actually get the personal side and show kind of what you got. But then if you don't have what it takes to get to that stage, then you kind of need to work on that first.
Okay. And as far as like cover letters, like one other thing I wanted to mention, which I forgot to mention at the top, is that these resumes have been formatted by our team here. And so you'll see they're pretty plain. It's just text. But if you are working with a recruiter, they will format your resume and generally remove most of the contact information because they're going to be that intermediary. Whereas if you are applying directly, would you recommend having a resume that's maybe a little bit more flashy, including images? How important is that, would you say?
Well, if it's a position that utilizes those tech skills, such as like a design position, maybe something UI, UX, that might be useful. Otherwise, I don't think it's highly important to necessarily have like a flashy sort of resume. It's more about the content of what is on the resume. So
nice. And especially when you're working with a recruiter, like if you were talking to your client about this person, you would kind of be able to fill in a lot of those blanks, right? Like if there is maybe, like we were saying, a lack of personality or whatever to the resume, you'd be able to say, I talked to this person, I met this person, this was my feeling about them. And so, yeah, just wanted to highlight that and make sure that people understand that these are formatted. These aren't how they looked originally. And so if you are working directly with a TA or going directly to a company, there are things maybe you can do to make your resume stand out a little bit more, like include a picture, GitHub, LinkedIn. Those are specifics. And beyond that, is there any other like kind of resume thoughts that you have that you feel like would be helpful for people to keep in mind when they are applying? Anything that you would want them to maybe things that have really caught your eye or trends, anything that's changed?
Yeah. So I know it does take a lot of time, but if you do have the ability to maybe write a cover letter or just to change your resume specific for the job that you're applying for, that would definitely help. So say, for example, if you are, altering this resume to make it, think of who is that resume for? Who is reading this resume? Put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager. Put yourself in the shoes of this talent acquisition staff who's going to be looking at a potential future employee within their organization. And so be thinking of it with that mindset. What do I need to do to get their attention? What do I need to do to stand out? If they're only looking for these three check marks of certain boxes, make sure that that's kind of up at the front, bolded, highlighted, and however you want to format that. But basically just be thinking of what is the purpose of me submitting this resume. It's for someone to look at it and gain a better understanding of my experience. So how can I highlight that to them?
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Del. I think that's all we have time for today. We're going to be taking a break from the streams for February, but we'll be back in March with Del reviewing more JDs, translating those JDs, decoding those JDs, and reviewing resumes. So if you would like us to review your resume, if you're interested in working in Japan, please reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation and maybe go through your resume live if you're comfortable with it. Or if you have a JD that you have questions about, feel free to send it to us, Del, and give
us a call.
Yeah, give us a call. Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.